We are going to start by adding a controller to our application, and we'll take a quick little review of controllers and a little review of ASP.NET Core MVC before we get into actually adding the controller. Last week we learned that controllers are the components that handle the user interactions. They work with models and they render views. So whenever the user submits something or enters a URL in the address bar, it is the controller that handles that interaction. The controller is also responsible for selecting the model that will be worked with and whether or not data is sent to views and which view should be selected. The ASP.NET Core MVC framework is an open source framework, and it is optimized for use with ASP.NET Core. Makes sense, right? It provides a pattern-based way to build dynamic websites. It uses all of the current web standards, and it allows for TDD, which is test-driven development. This is an agile design technique that involves repetitive testing and tweaking to produce a design. So it allows the developers to think through the design without worrying about all of the coding. Okay, so you're just trying to evolve your concept, basically. The framework also gives developers full control over the markup. There's quite a few features in ASP.NET Core MVC that we are going to be covering this week and in upcoming weeks. So we've talked a little bit about routing already. You're going to be learning more about that. We've mentioned model binding. You will actually get to see some of that this week. Model validation, you will also get to see this week. It basically ensures that your data is accurate. Dependency injection basically involves one object being dependent on another. There is built-in support for that, but that is not something that we are going to be covering for a while. Filters are pre- and post-processing logic for action methods. And you can configure these to run at different points in the execution pipeline. And an example would be if managers are the only people who can add and delete users, you would need to add an authorize attribute above your action methods that involve adding and deleting users. Areas are a concept that is more unique to .NET Core. They are used in very large applications to make the project easier to manage. So instead of sharing the same controllers, models, and views in a really large project, each major area has their own logical component of controller, models, and views. Okay, so it kind of splits it out. You can use ASP.NET Core MVC to build a web API. There is built-in support to format data as JSON or XML files. It can also support cross-origin resource sharing so that your web APIs can be shared across multiple web apps. That is beyond the scope of our class, okay? But that capability is built in. We already discussed the testability feature. It does make it quite easy to unit test. And the Razer View engine basically generates the web page for you, and it allows you to mix um, server side and client side code. So your HTML is basically your client side code, and the server side code would be more of the C# code, and it lets you kind of mix the code and render your views. Strongly typed views are ones that are connected to models, and you're going to see how that works today. Tag helpers, this is kind of new in .NET Core. They are used to create attributes inside HTML elements. So when you create links, you don't really code your href attribute. You use the tag helpers, and then kind of behind the scenes, your href is generated. The concept of view components is also built in. So if you have code that is used in more than one view, you can create what is called a view component. So we're going to focus a little bit on the controllers and the action methods at this point. And a controller is a C# class that is inherited from ASP.NET Core Controller class. Um, and all of your controller files would be in the root level controllers folder. The naming convention that you use is you have the class name followed by the word controller. So if you're going to create a home class, then you name it home controller.cs. In MVC, controller classes are placed in a namespace that consists of the project name, a dot, and the controller directory or folder name. So an example would be if you have a project named Endangered Animals and you have a home controller class, then the namespace is going to be Endangered Animals, which is the name of the project, dot controllers. In the project we are currently working on, which is called Future Values, MVC is going to place the home controller that we're going to create in the future value.controllers namespace by default. This is a convention that is part of the MVC framework. So if you try to rename your project, then you're going to run into issues with the conventions used by MVC because the project name is used as part of the namespace by default. So students have run into issues when they've tried to rename their projects. Controllers run in response to HTTP action verbs like get and post. And controllers typically call view methods that return something called a view result object. And if you remember from last week, a convention that is used is that the name of your action method, whether it's index or about or contact, corresponds to the name of the view that is going to be rendered by default. And so this little example down here shows you an index action method, and it says return view. So by default, by convention, it's going to return the index view. One method that you can use to pass data from controllers to models, and actually from views to controllers, is a view bag. A view bag is a dynamic object, and you can actually create properties on anything you want, and it is accessible from your different views. Another way to pass data from controllers to views is to create a model object, read in data, and then pass that object to the view. And today you are going to learn how to actually do both. You're going to learn how to pass a model object to a view, and you're also going to learn how to create a view bag property and pass that to a view as well. In this little example, at this point, we are using a view bag to create a name property and a future value. And those are directly accessible by the view. So we don't really have to pass them as parameters. The view actually can access them because they are dynamic objects. Now, they are not strongly typed because they are not connected to a model. Okay, they're just, it's just an object that we added a property to. And it's global, so it's available to everybody.